Oh, what's this? The worst episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Interesting. And it's on the Gang Cracks for Liberty Bell? Really? I happen to disagree with all my being, but I'm sure this fine fellow will have some interesting opinions on the matter. I have heard some hate being thrown towards this episode. Maybe Mr. Nostalgic here will give a voice to the displeased. 8 minutes and 25 seconds later.
I have contained my rage for as long as possible, but I shall unleash my fury upon you like the crashing of 1,000 waves! Begone, vile man! Begone from me!
Okay, I know. Calm down. It's just some random guy a year ago speaking on the internet. Wow, a lot of subs though. And you guys are probably new to this video of his, so I shouldn't leak all my feelings onto you right at the start. And hey, maybe if we go through the video real slow, it won't be as bad as I initially thought.
Liar!
Okay, so this 8-minute video starts with around 2 minutes of preamble bullshit, which is completely unrelated to why this episode specifically is bad. I mean, it's okay to set the scene a bit, but man, eating through a quarter of your video seems a little excessive. He goes through some video essay classics of saying, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia starts off in 2005, and hits us with a quick like and subscribe. It's one thing doing this at the end of a video, when we have decided if we liked it or not, but doing it at the start, to me, is a little shameless. And in these 2-ish minutes, there are still some silly things to point out.
In the 11th episode of the show's 4th season, titled The Gang Cracks the Liberty Bell, the gang takes their signature style of abrasive bantering and terrible decision-making skills back to the time of the American Revolution. This is arguably the worst episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is weird because it occurs in the same season as arguably 2 of the best episodes of It's Always Sunny, in The Nightman Cometh and The Gang Solves the Gas Crisis.
We're gonna hear him say arguably, an insufferable amount of times. Like, come on, everything is arguable. Arguably, water is bad for you. You know, you might drown. Arguably, this video is great. It has, words in it.
In 2008, It's Always Sunny was in the middle of its 4th season and was still in the process of experimenting with its formula for success. During these experimental periods of television shows, writers began to take some risks by pushing the boundaries of what they can deliver to the audience without losing them entirely.
Okay, so the first part of this is specifically talking about It's Always Sunny. And then for some reason the second part is talking about TV shows in general. But it's in the past tense, so is he saying they don't do this anymore? And either way, the second point has to be assumed to be talking about Always Sunny as well. Okay, was Always Sunny still in its experimental period? Well, the thing with Always Sunny is it never leaves its experimental period. Always Sunny has only experimented more as the years went on. Like with episodes such as Being Frank, The Gang Turns Black, The Suburbs. In the 15th season, they went to Ireland for half of it. And there's a reason why season 4 is a fan favorite, because it's easily one of the best. It's like he's saying the writers hadn't found what makes Always Sunny so great yet. But it was great since day one, and I believe peaked with season 4 and 5. They already knew what they were doing, make them the funniest seasons of the funniest show of all time. This is a running thing. He says stuff so confidently, like it's the truth, with nothing to back it up.
Testing the boundaries in this way isn't always done with the intent of breaking them. Sometimes it's just to see where these boundaries are, so they can avoid breaking them in the future.
Okay, the boundaries he is talking about is the one of losing your audience entirely from taking too much of a risk. He's implying that TV shows purposely break this boundary, which is fucking insane. Why the fuck would any TV show want to lose its audience entirely? Well, unless you're Disney, because at this point it seems they are trying to. And also, I don't think the Always Sunny crew are scientifically crafting anything to push any boundary. They are just trying to be funny.
The Gang Cracks the Liberty Bell imagines Charlie, Frank, Mac, Dennis, and Dee back in Philadelphia during the beginnings of the American Revolution as a reenactment of an elaborate con. Mac, Charlie, and Dennis are telling this completely fabricated historical inaccuracy to a city official in an attempt to get Patty's Pub acknowledged as a historical landmark. This is the first problem with this episode.
Okay, for starters, thanks for the big words on screen. Now I know this must be important. Secondly, this is literally the premise of the episode that you are calling a problem. That the gang are creating a story about how the bar was an essential part of the cracking of the Liberty Bell. They are telling the story to get the bar recognized as a historical landmark so they can make more money. This sums up the episode's premise, and to me, sounds great. And so, you're really gonna have to pull some logic out of the heavens to convince me otherwise.
You could argue that Glenn Howerton, Charlie Day, and Rog McElhenney are three of the funniest writers working in television. The characters that these three actors portray on the show are not hilarious writers, they are morally bankrupt idiots. Since this episode is essentially being written by Dennis Reynolds, Charlie Kelly, and Mac, it plays out as if it were written by three morally bankrupt idiots.
Yep, all good so far.
This would be fine if the episode somehow took an occasional moment to remind us that this is a reenactment of a fictional yarn being spun by the guys, which leads us to the second problem.
Hey, hold the phone. Second problem? Now, I haven't got any such certificate confirming my lack of donkey brains, but I'm pretty sure there was no first problem. So I can't really call the first problem a swing and a miss. It's more like he tried to swing, but he had no arms. Anyway, let's look at the second problem. Hopefully it's more than just a vacuum in space.
This would be fine if the episode somehow took an occasional moment to remind us that this is a reenactment of a fictional yarn being spun by the guys, which leads us to the second problem. It never does.
Okay, instantly off to a horrific start. For one thing, at the end of the episode, it does literally cut back to the gang telling the story in present time. Mr. Stalgic does mention this later, so I'll have to just assume he misspoke, or doesn't know what never means. But the major thing is here, it becomes apparent that the episode goes right over Nostalgic's head. He says it never cuts back to reality, but it does, just with some subtlety.
All right, look, I wish to court her in some manner, and I could use your help because I'm not, admittedly, very good with women.
Good with women? You mean good at women? Like you can't catch them when they run away from you? Bro, it's 1776. They don't have any rights. You can just take them and force them to do whatever you want.
The gang are telling the story. We are just seeing what they are describing on screen. Nostalgic doesn't understand that when Mac switches to speaking like a morally bankrupt idiot, Mac is saying these exact words in the office. This is where the episode does cut back to reality, just in, I think, a smarter, funnier way than just actually showing it.
Which leads us to the second problem. It never does. Imagine comedy as a big balloon being filled with helium. If we don't tether that balloon to something real, it will float off into the sky until it destroys itself. When you create a rather large comedic premise, you need something equally strong with which to anchor your idea.
So after giving us some homework to imagine his balloon, he just says what the analogy is meant to represent. So what does this analogy achieve? I think it's just there to gaslight you into believing his next sentence, which feels so meaningless.
When you create a rather large comedic premise, you need something equally strong with which to anchor your idea.
I think comedy is way too wide for that to be true. And what about small premises? Do they not apply either? Do they not need to anchor themselves to anything real?
This episode never really tethers itself to anything real.
Yeah, again, it does. You somehow just missed it.
It just presents its fictional premise and lets go until the final 30 seconds when we cut back to what is happening in the real world. While this closing moment is undoubtedly funny, it just doesn't really achieve the desired effect.
Drinking water keeps the body from dying, but it doesn't achieve its desired effect. Motherfucker, Always Sunny ain't Schindler's List. Its desired effect is to be funny. What the fuck?
There was a missed opportunity here to build a heightening pattern of cutaways that would have likely helped keep the insane premise in perspective. Drunk History is an example of a show that uses these types of real-world cutaways to its advantage. These moments allow us to break from the action and take a breath in the real world before diving back into the premise. Resting your comedy is an essential pacing tool, and when utilized correctly, it delivers some fantastic results.
Oh, this is a great drink. They thought that it made them like invigorated and aware. People are basically drinking little cocaine soda.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Hey, maybe drunk history is great. I really know nothing about it. But all that 5-second clip did for me is tell me to never ever check it out.
The Gang Cracks the Liberty Bell never comes up for air. It just, well, it drowns itself.
This video is making me want to drown myself. And that's the end of the second problem. At least there was an attempt this time. Actually, no, I'd prefer no attempt in this.
The third way in which this episode fails is that it doesn't treat the time period with any reverence. This is likely an undesired hangover effect from problem number 1.
I think he thinks that problem 1 is the fact that the gang are telling the story, which isn't a problem and wasn't explained why it's a problem. But yes, them telling the story will make the story historically inaccurate. But he says that's undesired. No, how don't you get that that is the point? It's unreal how this man just says these words with such confidence.
We can never truly immerse ourselves into this world of 1776, Sonny, because this episode only steps halfway into it.
Hey, for me, the story the gang was telling was truly inspiring, absolute cinema. But seriously, he's acting like this story, created by the gang, should immerse everyone with fucking grand counter arcs and themes or whatever. Nah, it's just funny. That's all. Nothing deeper. And that's fine. It's a comedy.
It's Always Sunny's comedy is driven through unmitigated commitment.
The actors and everyone else working on the show, I'm sure, are very committed. But the comedy being driven through commitment, it's just a pointless sentence. If they were committed but the show sucked, then you wouldn't be saying this. I would say Always Sunny's comedy is driven through great scripts and great comedians. But that also feels pointless to say, as that's most of the show, really.
But in this episode, everything feels like it's half measure. Instead of playing toward the drama and seriousness of the American Revolution and putting our ridiculous characters inside of it, this episode plays to an incredibly esoteric joke that the writers are essentially telling to themselves.
This sentence seemed like it was just here so we could say the word esoteric. I have to assume his meaning is that the writers self-indulge so much in a joke very few would get. But almost everyone gets the joke. Well, except you, Mr. Stalgic.
The dialogue shifts between half-assed version of 18th century English in one moment.
Pardon me, good sirs. But which of you gentlemen happens to be the highest-ranking military officer here?
And calling British soldiers bro in the next.
Bro, it's 1776. They don't have any rights. You can just take them and force them to do whatever you want.
This is undoubtedly intentional, but without anchoring it back to the three guys telling this story from time to time, it doesn't really land in the intended way.
That is the point. I've gone over this part already. It's so funny how he mentioned the scene, but doesn't see this is clearly them anchoring back to them telling the story.
The thing that makes It's Always Sunny's characters pop is the seriousness of the real world.
Okay, it's great when the characters are juxtaposed to the real world. But there's also incredible episodes of Always Sunny when they never interact with the rest of the world. That isn't what makes the characters pop.
Which leads us to the fourth and final issue with this episode. We're never really emotionally invested enough to care about what's going on.
This again? Wait, isn't every one of his points basically just this? Every problem he has isn't a problem and somehow flows into the next problem. It's so weird. And again, we're not meant to be emotionally invested in this purposely stupid made-up story. But so what? It's funny. Don't know what else to say. And now, prepare yourselves for the most conflicting, incomprehensible mess of language and visuals to ever exist. It is, I legitimately believe, an impossible task to figure out what his views are because multiple are battling each other on the front lines. Anyway, here we go.
The writers never tell us exactly why we, as an audience, should care about this story. We don't get that signature It's Always Sunny cold open at the top of this episode. That absolutely fundamental piece of puzzle is completely absent from The Gang Cracks the Liberty Bell.
Okay, if you guys don't remember, this is in fact the cold open he is currently playing on screen, and it's a classic one at that. So why, in the name of all that is holy, is he saying there isn't one? Before I get to that, let's just go through the definition of a cold open. A cold open, also called a teaser sequence, is a narrative technique used in television and films. It is a practice of jumping directly into a story at the beginning of a show, before the title sequence or opening credits are shown.
In order to be considered as a historical site, your bar would have to have some historical significance.
Well, trust us when we tell you that Patty's Pub played an extremely important part in history.
What part of history might that be?
The cracking of the Liberty Bell, of course.
So yeah, this is in the episode. So even if he's saying this cold open is shit, it doesn't matter. It's still a cold open.
Without it, we never have any understanding of what's at stake or why it's important. The only real mention of any real-world stakes comes with a sort of throwaway line from Dennis, where he states that he wants to get the bar recognized as a historical landmark so people can come and get smashed.
You know, they can come by, soak up some history, do some shots, get blasted.
He says the absence of the cold open makes it so there are no stakes. Then shows a clip where Dennis lays all the stakes out on the table. Then says, Dennis just said a throwaway line, without explaining why this line isn't enough. But it's enough. This is the setup. It's so clear and concise. It's real convenient how the one thing disproving his point is invalid because it's a throwaway line.
This episode is so lost in its own premise that it ends with the main characters setting up the premise again.
That is what you got from the end. Huh? I can't. Let's just move on.
You know what? Sit back, get comfortable. This is going to take a little longer this time. Okay, you ready?
It starts the same.
Okay.
The year was 1776.
There's no rhyming, no connections.
Stop saying fucking buzzwords with no explanation. Why? Tell me why.
None of that tight and concise writing that comes together in the final moments of any great It's Always Sunny episode. It just sort of ends exactly where it starts, and in turn, makes us feel like our characters have effectively gone nowhere.
Not like that's the entire point of a show or anything.
The Gang Cracks the Liberty Bell is arguably the weakest episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia to date. At times, this episode feels like it's from an entirely different series. It's one thing to take risks with the way you structure your television show, but completely eradicating every successful element of your show goes well beyond just taking a risk and into the realm of self-destruction.
Hey, he got me. That certainly sounds like a risk. I can't believe Glenn, Rob, and Charlie would think that one would pay off.
On paper, taking the cast of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and putting them in a different time period sounds like it would be a home run. But telling this story through the lens of a misinformed con in process removes the structure of what makes It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia so successful.
A misinformed con is against the structure of Always Sunny. Brother, that is like half the episodes. You said you loved the gas crisis, right?
It's Always Sunny is at its best when it challenges its stunted and arguably reprehensible cast of characters.
Arguably, this is a worse arguably of a video. Arguably reprehensible. A spade is arguably a spade.
It's Always Sunny is at its best when it challenges its stunted and arguably reprehensible cast of characters to exist in the real world, and, in turn, these characters are forced to face real-world consequences for their actions.
Newsflash, asshole. They haven't faced real-world consequences this whole goddamn time.
When you put these ridiculous characters into an equally ridiculous environment, it becomes almost impossible for anything to really stand out.
What salad?
This episode is all premise and no structure.
This feels like projection.
The end results in something that feels about as flat as Mac's wooden teeth. Writing long-form comedy is like cooking a really fancy dinner. You have to apply the right techniques at the right times to deliver the desired result. You need to know when to apply the heat and when to let the things rest.
Having a thought is kinda like having a dick. Most of the time, you should keep it to yourself.
And most importantly, you need a balance of flavors. If you just pile the same ingredient on top of itself, the odds are that you're going to be left with something that tastes terrible and looks like a mess.
If you keep shitting out your mouth, the odds are there's gonna be shit all over the floor.
The key ingredient in this recipe is reality. Comedy craves reality.
Wow, big words. It must be true.
The absurd needs to be treated as if it were completely normal. And in turn, the normal needs to be treated as if it were completely absurd.
They love it when you shuffle the words around.
This episode does neither, and instead it piles absurdity on top of absurdity, and the result is that nothing stands out. This episode just sort of forces itself to blend into its own weirdness until we can't really see what's funny anymore. When everything is crazy, craziness just becomes normal, and normal is a place where comedy goes to die. Hey, that's it for today's episode.
And it ends on the ultimate word salad. This video is where my sanity went to die. Okay, that is the end. And nearly for me as well. My arguments definitely dwindled in quality as the video went on, I'm sure. But we made it. I think the video speaks for itself. So I'll just start with my theory on why this incomprehensible sludge exists. We can see from his other content, he really likes to be around the 8 to 10 minute marks, like he's on a factory setting. My theory, and it is just a theory, is he heard that some fans don't like this episode, and so thought he could make a video on it, thinking most people would agree. But telling by his comment section and dislikes, fans overall do like this episode. I mean, classic Always Sunny literally never missed, so I think he just got unlucky. That's why I think he hardly made a point in this whole video. I wanted to try to figure out his actual opinions on the episode and why he thinks it's bad, but I couldn't. The video was also muddled and confused that he beat me. I lost. I checked out some other nostalgic videos, and he seems to follow a very similar formula for every video. But hey, maybe he has some hidden masterpieces I don't know about. There is an epidemic of channels, so many with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, that say so little and be so wrong, but disguise themselves with big words and with utter confidence, and when called out go, well, it's just my opinion. Hey, maybe nostalgic doesn't fit the last part, but the amount of times he said the word arguably doesn't give me much faith.
Arguably, you could argue, arguably